Hi, everyone, and welcome to For Immediate Release. This is episode 445. I'm Neville Hobson.
And the Poynter Institute for Media Studies is a nonprofit journalism school and research organization based in St. Petersburg, Florida. They own the Tampa Bay Times newspaper and the International Fact-Checking Network, where they operate PolitiFact. They just released their On Point, that's P-O-Y-N-T, of course, because that's how you spell Poynter, the On Point report, which sheds light on the evolving landscape of media relations. The report offers a lot of useful insights into how technology and shifting public perceptions are reshaping the way organizations interact with the media. So we thought we would dive into that today, starting with a look at the changing media landscape. On Point highlights a significant transformation in the media environment. Traditional news outlets are contending with declining circulation and viewership, while digital platforms and social media have surged as primary news sources. This includes things like Substack newsletters. And of course, journalists are writing these as a way to reach people, but other professionals are too without journalistic training, and so are activists and conspiracy theorists. Anybody can start one. All you need is a credit card. I read a LinkedIn post by Myra Baez, an audience strategist, who pointed out that the Washington Post has laid off most of its PR team. They wrote that talent-driven journalism is the future of media, and personalities and creators will lead the way. Myra says that the Post is creating a star talent unit, and that Al Jazeera Plus experimented with this. I guess she used to work there. More than a decade ago, intertwining the organization's brand with journalists' personal brands for Al Jazeera Plus's social media-oriented journalism, and she said it worked. We've entered the area of newsfluencers and news creators, she wrote. It's not just journalism. This trend spills over into other industries. Businesses are replacing traditional PR strategies with regular employees who bring strong personal brands. The era of faceless organizations is ending, she wrote. And that's a key point for business communicators, but she also notes that people aren't differentiating between reporting and influencer content, and she says it doesn't matter. It's all about connection over credentials, she says. But is it really? Does the idea of a professional journalist carry no weight anymore? Do we really want a newsfluencer whose only experience is on TikTok or Instagram to report a complex story the same way somebody who studied journalism in school and got experience working for professional editors can? Now, maybe I'm old, but I don't think so. But that doesn't mean there's no value out there with people telling stories in new and interesting ways. In any case, this shift has led to a more fragmented media landscape where audiences access information from a multitude of channels, each with its own credibility and reach. So before we move on to the issue of trust in media, Neville, any thoughts on the shift in the media landscape?
Yeah, I think it's quite a few, actually, but I think just a couple. This is inevitable, it seems to me, given the state of things that we see all around us. The signals are there, have been for a while, that this shift is coming. And it's not sudden, it's little by little, it's gradually been approaching. I think it's interesting that the shift it's more a question, I suppose, generationally based in terms of preferences of where people want to get their news and information from. If that's not front and center of the strategies of media organizations, I think they're going to be in trouble, because this is about giving people stuff that retains them and engages with them, and that's different generationally now, as we know. You and I are in that lovely group called the Boomers, right? And you and I actually are utterly not like the stereotypical boomer. I certainly am not, in terms of the things that interest me, the tools that I use, and how I behave online, all that kind of thing. Yet most people are. They're true to form in that regard. And you'll find that not just in journalism, but in politics and a ton of other things that we may touch on some of that. So I think this trend is inevitable. It's already underway. We're seeing some interesting things happening, and indeed the Poynter report is rich with insights on where this is going. So we need to, as communicators, be fully aware of this and not try and not understand it, because you have to understand it if you want to know who your audiences are and where they're at and how you will reach them. And the same with the journalists that you need to catch. I was thinking about TikTok, reading about that today, and what's going on in the US about are they going to be banned from America and all this kind of stuff. And yet TikTok, those two words, cropping up in news reports daily about a place where this or that is happening. And therefore, does it make sense to ban them? Well, that's a political drive. I get that. So, though, you're going to alienate a lot of your audience if you do that in the United States. But that's a slightly separate topic. But it makes me think of these shifts that are happening, and you have to be completely on top of the developments, pay attention to them. So lots happening.
Absolutely. And to your point with generations, yeah, absolutely. I think that boomers are probably still reading print newspapers by and large.
Yeah.
There is a risk, though, in assuming that any cohort is a monolith. I think one of the characterizations we hear of boomers is not very tech savvy. And yet it was boomers who invented the internet. Let's not forget that people like Bennett Cerf, boomers. Yep. And you look at somebody like James Licklider, who was involved with DARPA and the effort to create the packet switching that invented he preceded boomers. He was part of that greatest generation that came before. So I think there's danger in assuming too much about any one cohort, but definitely look at those characteristics and what media they're using.
I think it's worth noting, just as like an aside here, to mention that those folks who we see as boomers, Vince Cerf being one, wasn't a boomer, meaning he wasn't grey-haired and white-bearded when he did all this stuff. He was quite a young guy. Tim Berners-Lee, another one. He was in his 30s when he invented the World Wide Web. So,
yep. So keep in mind, there are very tech-savvy boomers out there and older. But let's talk about trust in media, because that's a pivotal focus of the report. Public confidence in media institutions has been waning, influenced by factors such as perceived biases. A lot of that is politically driven. Misinformation and the rapid spread of fake news, which I think we're at greater risk of because of the rise of the newsfluencer. This erosion of trust poses challenges for organizations striving to convey their messages effectively through through any media channels. And yet, 83% of people say local news outlets are at least somewhat important to the well-being of their local community. 69% say local journalists in their area are mostly in touch with their community. And 71% say local journalists are reporting news accurately. Now, how does that square with the idea that people don't trust the media? And the answer to that is the media is not a monolith. As the On Point report notes, people are more likely to trust people they know. Journalists and news organizations are most trusted when they develop relationships with customers, donors, business partners, and sources. And there's a growing number of local news and topic-oriented sites on the U.S. The On Point report says 3 new ones are launching every month on average. Are we targeting these with solid content? Neville, your thoughts on trust in media?
It's shifted. The old definitions are changing. What do we mean by trust? I think that's a good thing as it evolves. But it's very interesting, the point you mentioned in the Pointer report about the word media is too broad, and as they say, and inexact. The word trust is too broad and inexact. And I think that's absolutely right. So this word of this phrase of distrust of media, I agree with Pointer that it tends to look at a huge picture, not the local scene. And you hear this anecdotally a lot, don't you? And you reference it even, that people may not trust that particular organization, but hey, where I live and how I relate to them, they're wonderful. And that's sums it up really, doesn't it? So it's good to see this. It is, I believe, something important to pay attention to and be part of that shift and understand it so that you are able to engage with people as this whole thing shifts in terms of trust.
I really was taken by this focus on local journalism. I have been, as you know, I don't know if everybody listening knows that my degree is in journalism. Way back when print newspapers and radio were the only options available to you. But I have been very concerned about the closing of so many local community newspapers because you need somebody to sit in the school board meeting and report on that, in the zoning commission meeting to report on that. If there's no public oversight of these institutions, then they can just do whatever they want behind closed doors. So I'm heartened to see these local news sites opening. I don't know how rigorous their journalism is, but there's an opportunity there. There's that old expression that all politics is local. Well, maybe all media relations is local too. So I think we need to look at these as opportunities for getting our word out through journalists who are trusted by the local community and find the local angles to our stories. And by the way, AI should be able to help with that. If we need to crank out, our pitches for 50 different geographic regions, that could take a lot of time if you're trying to do that manually.
Yeah, I think I would add to that. So maybe this is just in the UK, but I suspect not. In that the media, local media, and this is a very broad observation, and it is just that, an opinion observation, that what I certainly note is that the online versions of newspapers here tend to be dominated by a handful of very big companies who own a lot of titles, and they are driven by ads, pop-ups. It's hard to see news stories. And when you go to a website, and that's your local newspaper website, you're just overwhelmed with the advertising and the promotional stuff to actually see the stories. So you tend not to go. So I often wonder when I do go and encounter all this stuff, how can they keep in business, for God's sake? Because surely circulation, the readership, what do you call it? The visitors must be declining, but I guess not. Print, the actual it's hard to find newspapers outside of the old traditional newsagents. You see them in the supermarkets. Local ones tend to be free giveaways now, so I don't think they have the credibility anymore. That's my own perception. That said, where I live in Somerset in England, the local papers here are actually quite enjoyable. They're very good at reporting local news. The only trouble is, so the journalism's good. The only trouble is, it's the medium in which that journalism is published. With all the ads and it's not a pleasant user experience, I find.
Yeah. I took a look in the On Point study. They listed a bunch of these relatively new local news sites, and it was heartening to see that they weren't riddled with ads. These are gathering efforts by people who are passionate about getting local news out there and not looking, they're not media moguls looking to sell a lot of advertising, probably just looking to cover their costs. And, it's probably a lot of volunteer citizen journalists who are saying, yeah, I'll go to that zoning commission meeting and sit in and write a report. Again, I worry about the quality of journalism, people knowing what sources to reach out to, how to do an investigation. I remember when I was working for a daily newspaper, I led an investigation. I was into a corruption, the county level, but I had to know how to go to the county office and get the right records and sit there with a ruler and go down every line and take the right notes and document all of this, which is something I learned in journalism school. Yes. You wonder if somebody who says, yeah, I'll go to the zoning commission meeting, even thinks to do something like that, as opposed to just taking the notes and reporting what they heard. But something is better than nothing, and it could evolve into something more, I suppose. Let's talk about the implications of all of this for media relations. That's the connection to the theme of this podcast. The report underscores a number of implications for media relations professionals. One you already referenced, Neville, diversified outreach. Relying solely on traditional media is no longer adequate. Organizations need to engage with a variety of platforms, including digital outlets, blogs, podcasts. Did I mention podcasts? And social media influencers and newsfluencers in order to reach their target audiences effectively. And I wonder how many PR agencies, not to mention in-house PR teams, are thinking about the need to undergo this transformation. Then there's authenticity and transparency. In an era of skepticism, being genuine and transparent is crucial. Audiences are more likely to trust organizations that communicate openly and honestly, acknowledging both successes and challenges. And here again is an opportunity, as Myra mentioned, to have those employees who have strong personal brands representing the organization rather than being a faceless organization. We need to build direct relationships. With the rise of social media, organizations have the opportunity to establish direct connections with their audiences. This direct engagement can help build trust and foster a sense of community. And of course, embracing technology, leveraging technological tools such as data analytics and AI can enhance the effectiveness of media relations strategies. They can help in understanding audience preferences, predicting trends, and crafting personalized messages. So in terms of media relations, Neville, thoughts?
Well, you nailed it, I think, Shel. I think Pointer talks about a point which makes sense to me. Media organizations that can adeptly blend compelling narratives with captivating audio and visual elements will emerge as industry leaders, shaping news consumption, generating new revenue, and refining the boundaries of journalism. So they got to expand the skill sets of their journalists to get there. So it's not a single thing that needs to happen. There's quite a bit that needs to happen there. And for communicators to understand this from a media relations point of view, there are changes there too, to be kind of in step with what is happening, as Pointer mentions. So it is quite interesting. You mentioned podcasts earlier, and one of the trends they talk about is that what news publishers are planning to produce more of, 47% of them more podcasts. Okay, that's beaten by newsletters as 52% and video by 64%. But guess what they're not planning to produce more of? Articles, traditional articles.
Yeah, 0%.
0%.
Plan to produce
exactly.
more articles.
Yeah. Now, equally interesting, just for me to mention this, that Pointer cites the data for those metrics. It's global. They talk to media leaders. They say 56 countries. This is for Reuters Institute of Journalism report last year, the Journalism, Media and Technology Trends and Productions 2024. The 2025 version has just come out literally the other day. I was glancing through it the other day. It's fascinating, some of the stuff, so I need to read it properly. That's probably going to be one of my topics on a monthly episode, by the way. But it's interesting it's mentioned here in that way. And I think that, like all the things that they're talking about here that you and I are discussing, each of us as communicators need to be paying very close attention to these shifts that are happening, even the ones that are just trends that might happen in 6 months or whatever it might be. This is a part of the evolution, if you will, of what's happening in the overall media landscape. I think there's so much to grapple with this that you need to decide what you're going to pay attention on. You need some help with that, probably. So Pointer's report is a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, it is. And in terms of podcasts, I think being able to pitch a media outlet for its podcast is something we're going to need to start doing. But I certainly wouldn't limit myself to media podcasts. I would look at the podcasts the media are quoting. This is something we talked about last week, is you're seeing people quoted from, Zuckerberg was quoted just the other day from his interview on Joe Rogan's podcast. There are podcasts that have large followings that people are appearing on and then being quoted by the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. So podcasting, like TikTok, is now becoming a source of news. Used to be Twitter at one point, a little less these days, and more the podcasts and TikTok. So
yeah, and in fact, the 2025 version of that Reuters report that I mentioned talks about that in the context of growth of social media platforms that are going to get media attention. Twitter, or X, I should say, is at the bottom, literally. Blue Sky, TikTok, I've forgotten the other one. There's three ones that caught my attention, but Blue Sky in particular are right up there. No, Threads is off the chart almost. It's down there with X. They don't see Threads. They don't see Threads, as I suspect my interpretation. They don't see Threads as mattering much in the future. I was actually grappling to try and find the chart that I referenced, but I can't lay my hands on it in a second. But it's interesting. We're seeing that prediction happening, and indeed you can get some indicator of that. The X, the media attention on X, I saw a story 2 days ago that academia, generally speaking broadly, 60 academic institutions across Germany and Austria quit Twitter, gone. They're out. Yep. They're talking about government agencies in Germany leaving X, not Twitter, X. And some media organizations are stepping up their moves elsewhere. So Blue Sky is not the only destination people are going to. So we're seeing this gaining momentum, I think it seems to me. And the influence to it, a lot of it, of course, is what's happening in the United States in the political landscape. We have a new president taking office formally in a week's time as we're recording this on 20th of January. So all of that, it'd actually be interesting, Shel, to see as a kind of a related aside, what media to pay attention to on the 20th of January. The usual suspects, of course, because they're not going away, the mainstream broadcast media, but you're going to see live broadcast coverage coming from all sorts of places that you might not even have thought of. So you will be able to encounter that kind of thing wherever you are online. I'm pretty certain of that. That's not much different to what's already been happening, but maybe it's intensifying. And it could be that you'll find influencers and people described that way in the United States, certainly, will be reposting stuff like that. And so you'll have discussions going on and opinions being shaped and formed and published and quoted upon. So it's going to be pretty much a Wild West landscape, I would say.
It is, and everybody's going to walk away with a different perception
Totally
based on
confused.
what media they've consumed. Unlike the old days when everybody watched Walter Cronkite and got the same information. Which leads us to some strategic recommendations. And we're talking about social media. One of these strategic recommendations is to prepare for the end of public social media. It's a caveat. This is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. But Chris Penn mused on LinkedIn that AI slop and bots might take down public social media because, as he wrote, the only ones left will be bots talking to each other. He suggested that you make your plans now for a future where your social networking is out of the public eye in private places where people in your circle of trust provide the support and connection you crave. And if you're a marketer, prepare for a future where public social media is no longer a driver of any kind of business. Interesting post from Chris, and I don't disagree with it. But again, I don't think this is something that's going to happen imminently. This is going to happen gradually as those AI bots start taking over. But a couple of other strategic recommendations. Invest in media literacy. Educating both internal teams and the public about media literacy can help in discerning credible information from misinformation, thereby fostering a more informed audience. Cultivate media relationships, right? Building and maintaining strong relationships with journalists and media outlets and newsfluencers is essential. Understanding their needs and providing valuable, newsworthy content can enhance your media coverage. And then there's crisis preparedness. In this particular information environment, having a robust crisis plan is not an option. You have to be prepared to respond quickly and effectively to negative publicity that can come from just about anywhere now. Well, that can mitigate potential damage. There's a ton of information and data in this report. There's a whole section on AI that we didn't even touch on. But Neville, any concluding thoughts?
Well, I was thinking you mentioned about building relationships with journalists. And one thing I started doing is paying attention to media organizations who are publishing a list of journalists active on Blue Sky as part of these new starter packs that Blue Sky enabled. I've seen probably a dozen different media organizations across Europe started doing this, and some specialist trade publications, particularly in the pharma and healthcare. Those are available sources. You don't have to go digging for this kind of stuff, listing all those folks. Now, it's not to say that you get them and you start spamming them with messages on the social network. You'll soon know that that's absolutely not the way to do this. Some probably will, though. But there's a great place to gain that. And of course, no one else is doing this on other platforms. So that's going to give Blue Sky an advantage as people start building out their approach to connecting with journalists and others of interest. So it's a useful tool, by the way. And there's some other tools where you can convert them into actual lists, even more valuable. So those are the things you need to take advantage of, because it will give you an advantage in doing things that way.
Absolutely. The link to the report and to the LinkedIn posts that I referenced, the one from Maya Baez and from Chris Penn, are going to be in the show notes. And that will be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.